OK, the time just coming up to 10 minutes past 10. How much do you know about the Freemasons? They have a reputation of being a very secretive organisation, and I suppose the joke about secret handshakes would be the first thing that would come to most people's minds. But the head of the Freemasons in Ireland, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodges, is quite a public figure. George Dunlop from the Northwest, indeed here in the Waterside, here in the city from the Waterside, has been in many newspapers over the past year or so presenting cheques to charitable causes in Ireland, North and South. So what are the Freemasons for? How difficult is it to join? Do you need to be from a certain religion to be a member? I'm very pleased to say that George Dunlop has joined me in the studio. George, good morning. Thank you very much for coming in. I think a lot of people this morning might be surprised to find out that the head of this organisation is from the city here. Is that because really the public don't know very much about the Freemasons apart from myth?
Well, this is the first time we've had a Grand Master, in fact, from this area.
Really?
We alternate normally between North and South, but because Belfast is the bigger complex, the alternates would be Dublin and Belfast. This is the first time, I say, we've had one from here, and I'm very pleased to be holding that post at this time.
How long have you been in the role for?
This is my 4th year.
Your 4th year. Mm-hmm. How long does it last for? Have you any idea?
I have a limit of 10 years, after which I'm bound to get out, unless I rule otherwise.
Well, that's the joy of being at the top, isn't it?
Yes.
Are you aware that there's a perception that the Masons are secret and secretive?
Oh yes, I'm very much aware of that. I mean, we as a body, and I personally have spoken to many, many groups and answered various questions to allay their fears and to change their perceptions. And I think it's a pity that there is this perception of secrecy and colluding together for all sorts of reasons and ruling the world as well, I would add, which I find remarkable. But yes, it does go on, and I welcome being here today because I trust that what I have to say may help to change the perceptions of people who think wrongly. OK.
Well, I suppose one of the biggest questions that people will have, rightly or wrongly, is people have a perception that you can't be a Catholic, for example, to join the Freemasons. Is that true?
That is absolute rubbish. First of all, it's rubbish in the sense that way back in the early days of Irish Freemasonry, the vast majority of Freemasons in Ireland were of the Catholic faith and outnumbered anybody else, I would add. We even had people such as Dan O'Connell, who in fact was a Freemason, and many other members of the government in the South. What actually happened eventually was that there was a papal bull, which we were caught in because we were classified as a secret society. And that's where the debate starts. I mean, we are not a secret society. However, that now has been eased, and we have people of all faiths, and especially from the Catholic faith, coming into our order now.
The idea, as you say, of a secret society, you're saying it's not a secret society, but of course some of the things that people know are not for others to know, as it were. Isn't that right?
Yes, well, that's right. But this is because this is among members of a particular society or group. I think, in fact, a good example would be, I'm sure you won't give me the number of your credit card.
No.
But I would like to know if you keep that a secret, and I'm annoyed at that.
It's of absolutely no use to you.
Well, exactly. But having said that, I think you need to go back to the origins of Freemasonry. Originally, they were the stonemasons, and they, in fact, were the people who were physically and operatively involved in building the large cathedrals and all those magnificent buildings that we see throughout the world, especially in Europe. Freemasonry is reputedly to have started in England. And of course, you see what happened in London with the various buildings there that have been there. You especially would appreciate that. And of course, what happened through time, the numbers actually in the stonemasons, they were moving around from site to site. But they, in fact, were paid wages. They were ranked according to their experience or ability. Therefore, there were 3 grades of stonemason. There was the apprentice, there was the craft mason, and then there was the master mason. Now, in the early days, of course, they didn't read or write. What they did, they put signs on whatever they had done to gain credit for the work that was done, just with a hammer and chisel, if you like. So they could recognise that it was you or I who did that.
So that's where some of the symbolism comes from.
That's a lot of the symbolism comes from that. But it is symbolism. You're quite right. Mm-hmm. But what we have then to copy in a sense, but again, it's purely symbolic. Is we in fact have grades in Freemasonry which are entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and Master Mason.
It's called craft, isn't it?
It's craft, yeah. And we're identified by our station or how far we've progressed by virtue of the words or the handshakes that have been given to us. But those are used purely for recognition among Freemasons. So if someone doesn't come into a meeting and sits at a level that he's not qualified to sit at, that's the sort of thing that happens.
Nothing more sinister to it than that.
Nothing more sinister than that, I promise you. Yeah.
Well, very interesting piece that I read. It was written in 2004 by somebody who was the Provincial Grand Master of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Wicklow and Wexford, Mr. Eric Waller.
Yes.
And Eric was writing, saying that when he was in that office, he became increasingly aware of the poor public perception of the order, caused him great concern, and said that he felt it posed a major threat to future progress and possibly even our very existence. Is that a sort of a thought process that has been around for a while?
Eric was my predecessor as Grand Master.
I'm with you.
I have followed him. I was his deputy for 6 years. So I know where he's coming from. But I think, in fact, he's looking at the South specifically. The numbers in the South are very poor. Well, they're not as bad as they used to be, but they have gone badly, especially away back to the past times when I said to you that the vast majority were of the Catholic faith and the vast majority came from the South. But that's what he's referring to. Yes, there has been a diminishing, in fact, in numbers. But the other thing is that our numbers now are much the same as they were pre-First World War.
Really?
And I say that because after the soldiers came back from the front in the First and Second World War, there was a great desire to maintain the community that they had formed on the battlefield. So they were attracted towards Freemasonry. And the number of lodges that were formed were out of this world. So much so that Grand Lodge had to put an embargo on any further development of new lodges. So that meant there was a peak after the First World War. There was another major peak after the Second World War for the same reason. And of course, ultimately, as they have passed on now, and the people who were affected by that growth, most of them now have passed on as well, in a sense. I mean, Second World War people are still around. But nonetheless, with the drop in the standards in society and with, in fact, the diminution of the people who were impelled to join because of coming back from war and looking for companionship, then the numbers did drop, yes.
Well, it's interesting because the friend who said to me to get in touch with you, somebody that I went up to stay with when I was in Belfast recently, and he said, oh, you know, my dad was in the Masons, and I said, yeah, I thought he might have been kind of thing. He says, well, I am now. Yeah. I was like, really? And he was this sort of, I just got really interested in talking to him about it. But he said that when he came to the lodge that he's at, that I think everybody was pretty much in their 70s and 80s. Yeah. And he said that they were basically sort of dying out, really, and that it needed a real injection of young. And he managed to persuade several of his friends to join. So there's something like 4 or 5 of them now in their 30s and 40s that joined this particular lodge. But that, I would imagine, is quite unusual, isn't it? Isn't it quite difficult to recruit, as it were, younger people?
Well, number one, we do not recruit.
Okay.
That's the first thing.
Wrong word.
Number one, if in fact you wish to join Freemasonry, normally
you're asked,
it comes. No, you aren't even asked. Normally, in fact, you detect that your friends are in the Masonic order, and you say, "I'd be interested to join that because you seem to enjoy it." I mean, if you want to ask because you know there is a Masonic order and you've no friends to go through, you can go onto our website. That's irishfreemasonry.org, and you can actually apply for membership. Now, membership, in fact, is tricky because, number one, Freemasonry is for everybody, but everybody isn't for Freemasonry, if you know what I mean. There are certain specific requirements that allows you to be a Freemason.
Can you divulge those?
Oh, I can. Yes, it's simple.
What do you have to...
say the least.
What do you have to do or be?
Well, first of all, you must have belief in the Supreme Being. Okay.
Does that have to be God, a Christian God specifically?
No. Okay. It is a Supreme Being, the Creator, but He may be your God. If you're a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian, whatever, it's your God in that sense. And that's why, in fact, worldwide and even here, it's a tremendous organisation because we mix with people with that simple faith. But we're not a religion. We're often claimed to be a religion, but we don't have the sacraments, and we can't actually prepare people for acceptance in the heavens, to say the least. But nonetheless,
Belief in a
the
supreme
other
being.
condition is that if, in fact, you make an application, you have to pass through a scrutiny. And that, in fact, is where your name is put up in a particular lodge. If, for example, if you're not linked to Friends, then the Grand Lodge, through its website, will put your name up in a lodge which they believe to be appropriate to you within your vicinity and with people, in fact, of like ilk in terms of your profession or your background. So, in fact, you will have a good chance of settling in better. As well as that, then, of course, you're balloted for in your lodge. If you're accepted, it goes to a scrutiny committee then in the area. And then if you pass that, then you'll be taken in. But scrutiny, in fact, can result in not joining, because it may well be that they find that your background is not correct.
Do you need a clear criminal record?
You've been a jailbird or something like that,
Yes.
or you've been guilty, okay.
So you need to have a clear record.
You need to be living in good repute among your friends and neighbours. Simple as that.
Okay.
So those are the two main qualifications.
What about the other? One of the other things that's sometimes levelled at Freemasonry is that people get into it because it's good for business, because people protect each other then within business.
Well, that should never happen, okay. Obviously it does happen, but it's very difficult to detect. And we know people do that in all spheres of society. You know, they belong to something because they gain from it in business terms or whatever. I'm sure there are some who, in fact, would use that, but I don't know them. I know nothing of them. And if we come across that, we would punish that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was interested also in what your predecessor had to say just about, he talks about the 4 S's, the sinister, secretive, sectarian, self-interested. This is what people have the view of, or did have the view of. And he's talking like 5 or 6 years ago as it is now.
That's right.
And he's saying the difficulty is that most brethren that are involved in things like Rotary or the Round Table or whatever talk very freely about being in those groups, but none of them will talk about the fact that they're Freemasons, even though they're allowed to.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's one
correct.
of the big problems.
There is a reluctance, and I think they're affected by the misperception of society that believes them to be something sinister, to say the least. Mm-hmm. And of course, they're a bit coy. Plus the fact that many of them may not be just as skilled as they might be to defend Freemasonry in the public place, and that would be something that would cause them to shy away from speaking. They would pass you on to someone more senior or more qualified to respond.
What are the benefits, George, of becoming a Freemason?
Oh, the benefits are purely the companionship, in fact, among brethren of the same thought and same ilk. I think I should go back a bit and say that Freemasonry, in fact, it doesn't make bad men good, but it makes good men better, if you follow the thought. Mm-hmm. And you follow that path. And then, of course, the things you engage in, are things that keep you busy, to say the least. You visit your lodge regularly, mostly every month. And, of course, you go through the usual things that meetings go through with the opening and the minutes and the responses to whatever. And, of course, we engage in many things. You mentioned the charity, for example.
There's a lot of that,
charity does take up a fair bit of the time of the lodge members. And, I think the last report I got was that we had raised £1 million over 10 years. That isn't true, because the one you referred to when I came in, we've raised £92 million.
Goodness.
In 10 years. And that's for the public purse, not for Freemasonry, by the way. Now, I'm saying that because we don't seek plaudits for that. We'd rather act in a humble or a state of humility, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But we don't really boast about our charities, and I've just done it over the airwaves. So I do apologise. But you did mention it, so I could come back.
You're off the hook, absolutely. Mm-hmm. It was very interesting also that I read when I was talking to my friend, and he said, that there are lodges within the overall Irish Grand Lodge, is that right, that are all over the world?
Yes.
So, like, there's some in, was it the Congo? Somewhere like that, I read?
Africa, New Zealand,
How does
Australia.
that work?
Well, that all stems back from the colonialism. And the Irish were involved, of course, both through the English with colonialism. They fought in their armies. So that's the link army. The military were out abroad in America, in Canada, and you name it. And they, in fact, then formed lodges. And these were lodges, in fact, with movable warrants. They could move to any site. And they normally had a lodge box, and they took that with them. So that's how they came to be formed. So what happened was then people, in fact, in the local area actually set up the local people to continue with the lodge that was formed. And
they go on to this day.
Yeah, on to this day.
Briefly, George, the future for Freemasonry, do you think, in Ireland, is it looking better than it was, or...?
It's stabilised at the present time. Obviously, we'd like to see some growth. We don't recruit, so that's a limitation, and all we can do is to tell people who we are, what we are, and what we believe in, and not to fear us, for heaven's sake, because there's nothing sinister.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. It's George Dunlop there. Very interesting. 71266 is the number to ring. Do please give us a ring if you've got any views about that. If any of the myths or stereotypes that you had in your mind there about Freemasonry have been debunked by listening to George. George there is the Grand Master of the Grand Lodges, so he's the head guy in the whole of the island of Ireland, and he's from the Waterside.